I came home from the hospital 3 days earlier than my daughter expected. That's the only reason I found out they were already preparing to take my house. Cold November rain drifted across the parking lot while the discharge nurse wheeled me toward the entrance. "You sure nobody's picking you up, Mr. Whitaker?" she asked. I told her I'd be fine. Emily thought I was staying 2 more nights after the surgery for observation. Technically, I was supposed to. But my blood pressure stabilized faster than expected, and the cardiologist signed my discharge papers before lunch. I almost called my daughter from the hospital. That part stays with me now. If I had called first, they would have had time to stop talking before I got home. The Uber dropped me off at 1:43. 32 years in that house. Same white porch swing. Same oak tree beside the mailbox. Same cracked stone walkway my wife used to complain about every spring before cancer took her 5 years ago. Rainwater dripped steadily from the gutters while I climbed the porch steps slower than I used to. Everything hurt a little after surgery. Not enough to scare you. Just enough to remind you your body had recently been opened by strangers. I reached into my coat pocket for my keys. Then froze. Voices inside. Emily's voice. And a man I didn't recognize. I stood still outside my own front door listening without meaning to. At first I assumed maybe it was a contractor. Then I heard the sentence that stopped my hand against the lock. The property should move quickly once he's transitioned out. Transitioned out. Not recovering. Not coming home. Transitioned out. Rain tapped softly against the porch roof while something cold moved slowly through my chest that had nothing to do with the weather. Inside, Emily lowered her voice. "I just don't want him upset before everything's finalized." Everything finalized. My grip tightened around my keys. The unfamiliar man spoke again. The assisted living facility already confirmed availability for January. Assisted living. For a second, I honestly wondered if they were talking about someone else. Then Emily sighed quietly. "He's going to resist it at first," she said. "But honestly, he can barely manage this place anymore." That sentence landed harder than the surgery itself. 3 weeks earlier, I had rebuilt the entire back deck railing alone. I still drove. Still paid every bill. Still climbed onto the roof twice a year to clean my own gutters. But standing outside my own front door listening to my daughter discuss me like paperwork waiting to be processed, I suddenly realized something terrifying. These conversations had probably been happening for months. And I was the last person to know. The man inside lowered his voice again. "Once the documents are signed, selling the house becomes much easier." Selling the house. My house. The house my wife and I spent 32 years paying off. The house where Emily learned to walk barefoot across the kitchen floor while holding onto cabinet handles for balance. I stood there in the cold holding a hospital discharge envelope in one hand and my house keys in the other while rainwater slid steadily from the porch roof beside me. And for the first time in my life, I felt like a visitor standing outside a future that no longer included me. I stayed outside the front door for another full minute after that. Maybe longer. Long enough for rainwater to soak through the shoulders of my coat. Long enough for the November cold to start settling into my knees. Long enough to realize the conversation inside my house wasn't hypothetical. This wasn't someday. This was already in motion. I stepped back quietly from the porch before the floorboards could creak beneath my weight. The voices inside continued calmly. Casually. That part disturbed me almost more than the conversation itself. Emily didn't sound emotional. She sounded organized. Prepared. I walked slowly down the porch steps and back toward the side of the house where the kitchen windows couldn't see me. Rain dripped from the gutters beside the garage. My hospital bracelet still circled my wrist beneath my coat sleeve. I remember staring at it for several seconds thinking how strange it was that less than 2 hours earlier nurses had been checking my heartbeat while my own daughter was apparently scheduling the removal of my entire life. The unfamiliar man inside laughed softly about something. Then Emily said, "I just need everything settled before spring." Spring. Not if. Not maybe. Spring. The side gate creaked slightly as I moved toward the backyard. That sound instantly brought back memories of my wife. Karen used to complain about that gate every summer. "Either oil it or replace it, Daniel," she'd say. I never did either. Funny the things that survive longer than people. I stood beneath the covered patio trying to think clearly while cold rain tapped against the yard around me. At first I told myself there had to be an explanation. Maybe assisted living was temporary. Maybe Emily was overreacting after my surgery. Maybe the man inside wasn't a realtor at all. Then I heard another sentence through the partially open kitchen window. "The valuation came in higher than expected," the man said. Valuation. That word erased the last comfortable lie I was trying to tell myself. Nobody discusses property valuation unless someone intends to sell. I closed my eyes for a moment. 32 years in that house. Karen choosing paint colors. Christmas mornings. The height marks on the pantry wall Emily begged me not to erase when she turned 13. Every version of my adult life existed inside those rooms. And now strangers were apparently discussing timelines for when I'd be removed from it. A sudden wave of exhaustion hit me so hard I had to steady myself against the patio railing. Part of it was the surgery. Most of it wasn't. Inside the house, a chair scraped lightly across the kitchen floor. Then footsteps. Moving closer. I barely had time to step farther into the shadows near the garage before the back door opened. Emily walked out holding her phone against her ear. She looked tired. Older than I remembered her looking even a month earlier. For a second I almost stepped forward. Almost called her name. Then I heard what she said into the phone. "No, he still thinks he's coming back home after recovery." Recovery. Interesting word. Because suddenly I understood something horrifying. My daughter wasn't planning around my illness anymore. She was planning around my absence. I stayed hidden beside the garage until Emily went back inside. Rainwater slid steadily from the roof gutters onto the cracked concrete near my shoes. My chest hurt. Not sharply. Just deep enough to remind me I probably should have still been in a hospital bed instead of standing in my backyard listening to my daughter quietly organize my disappearance. Inside the kitchen, cabinet doors opened and closed. Coffee mugs. Silverware. Normal sounds. That part felt almost unreal. Because the world inside my house hadn't changed at all. Only my understanding of it had. I looked toward the back porch window. Warm kitchen light spilled across the wet patio bricks where Karen used to keep flower pots every spring. Emily had removed most of them after the funeral because she said dead plants made the house look sad. I remembered arguing with her about that. Not seriously. Just one of those small conversations families forget 5 minutes later. Funny how your brain suddenly starts pulling random memories forward once trust cracks open. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out my phone. For several seconds I just stared at Emily's contact name on the screen. Then I did something that probably saved me. I called someone else instead. Michael Denton. My attorney. We'd known each other almost 20 years. He handled the paperwork when Karen and I updated our wills after Emily got married. He answered on the second ring. "Daniel?" His voice immediately changed. "You all right?" I looked toward my kitchen window before answering. "No," I said quietly. "I don't think I am." Something in my tone must have told him this wasn't a casual call. "Where are you right now?" In my backyard. Silence. Then. Why are you in your backyard? Rain tapped steadily against the patio roof above me. I kept watching shadows move inside my kitchen while I answered. Because there's a man inside my house discussing assisted living arrangements with my daughter. Another silence. Longer this time. Finally Michael spoke carefully. Do you know who the man is? No. Have they asked you to sign anything recently? That question landed heavily. Because suddenly my brain started connecting things I hadn't paid attention to before. The insurance paperwork Emily insisted on helping organize after surgery. The stack of forms she'd left on the dining room table last month. The way she kept asking whether I'd considered simplifying my finances. Small things. Forgettable things. Until suddenly they weren't. Daniel, Michael said calmly, I need you to listen to me carefully. I lowered myself slowly onto the patio chair because my legs suddenly felt unsteady. Do not sign anything. The rain kept falling softly around me. Inside the house, Emily laughed quietly at something the man said. Michael continued. And do not tell them you know anything yet. That part surprised me. You think I should pretend? I think, he said carefully, that people reveal a great deal when they believe they're ahead of you. I stared through the rain-covered window at the outline of my daughter moving through my kitchen. The same kitchen where she used to sit wrapped in blankets after nightmares when she was 8 years old. And for the first time since hearing the conversation, anger finally started replacing shock. Not loud anger. Something colder. More controlled. Because suddenly I understood something important. Whatever Emily and that man were planning. They thought they still had time before I found out. Michael kept me on the phone while cold November rain rolled steadily across the patio roof. Mostly, he asked questions. Quiet ones. Had Emily mentioned power of attorney recently? Had anyone asked me to sign updated medical paperwork? Did my daughter have access to my banking information after the surgery? Each question pulled another loose thread in my memory. 3 weeks earlier, Emily insisted on sitting beside me during the hospital intake appointment. At the time, I thought she was being protective. Now I remembered how focused she'd been on the forms. What happens if recovery takes longer than expected? Who handles finances temporarily? What if medication affects decision-making? At the time, those questions sounded caring. Standing in the rain outside my own house listening to strangers discuss my future like a scheduling issue, they sounded very different. Daniel, Michael said finally, I need you in my office first thing tomorrow morning. I have cardiology follow-up. Cancel it. That surprised me enough to pull my attention away from the kitchen window. You think this is that serious? He was quiet for a second. Then he said something that settled deep into my chest. I think people reveal who they really are the moment they start organizing your life without including you in it. Inside the kitchen, Emily set plates on the dining table. Dinner. Like this was an ordinary Tuesday. Like she hadn't spent the afternoon discussing assisted living facilities and property valuations while I was still wearing a hospital bracelet. Part of me still wanted to believe there was some misunderstanding underneath all this. Maybe she was scared after the surgery. Maybe she genuinely thought I needed help. Maybe the man inside was discussing options, not plans. Then the back door opened. I froze instantly. Emily stepped onto the patio carrying a thick folder pressed against her chest. The unfamiliar man followed behind her with a leather portfolio tucked beneath his arm. Even through the rain, I recognized the logo printed across the folder immediately. Wexler Realty Group. Real estate. Not medical planning. Not recovery arrangements. Real estate. The man pointed toward the backyard fence while speaking quietly. Emily nodded several times. Then he gestured toward my detached workshop beside the garage. That workshop kit was Karen's 50th birthday gift to me. Emily helped me build it during one unbearably hot July when she was 16. I suddenly remembered her sitting cross-legged in the driveway wearing one of my old baseball caps while blue paint covered half her hands. That memory hit so hard I physically had to steady myself against the patio railing. "Daniel?" Michael's voice came through the phone again. "What's happening?" I swallowed slowly. "There's a realtor here." Silence. Long enough that I could hear rainwater hitting the metal grill beside me. Then, "Are you sure?" As if answering him, the realtor opened the folder. Property photos. Market comparisons. Estimated listing price. Prepared documents. Not exploratory. Ready. My stomach dropped so suddenly it almost felt like another medical episode. Because standing there in the rain watching my daughter flip through paperwork for the sale of my house, I realized something that hurt even worse than betrayal itself. This hadn't started after my surgery. The surgery had simply given them a timeline. Emily pointed toward the kitchen windows while speaking quietly to the realtor. Then both of them looked toward the house the same way investors study a property before renovations begin. Not emotionally. Practically. And for the first time since Karen died, I felt something inside me stop trying to explain other people's behavior in the kindest possible way. I barely remember driving to the Marriott that night. Mostly, I remember rain on the windshield and the strange feeling that my life had somehow continued moving without me inside it. I slept maybe 2 hours. At 7:15 the next morning, I walked into Michael Denton's office carrying a hospital discharge envelope, a change of clothes, and 32 years of trust collapsing quietly inside my chest. Michael listened without interrupting while I told him everything. The realtor. The assisted living facility. The conversation on the patio. The listing packet. He didn't react dramatically. That helped. People who stay calm around chaos make survival easier. When I finished, he leaned back slowly in his chair. "Daniel," he said carefully, "I need to ask you something unpleasant." After the previous day, unpleasant no longer felt like a category with limits. "All right. Have you noticed missing mail recently?" That question caught me off guard. "Maybe," I admitted. "Why?" Michael opened his laptop and turned the screen toward me. A property pre-listing draft. My address across the top. Estimated market value. $842,000. Interior notes. Lot dimensions. Suggested renovations. Prepared 3 weeks earlier. 3 weeks. Before my surgery. Something inside me went cold. "This was already being built before you entered the hospital," Michael said quietly. I stared at the screen. The living room photos. Karen's kitchen. My back porch. Pieces of my life organized into selling points. Then Michael clicked another document. Mail forwarding confirmation. Temporary address update request. Filed electronically 9 days earlier. Forwarding destination. Emily Whitaker's address. For several seconds, I honestly stopped hearing the room around me. Because suddenly dozens of small confusing moments from the past few months rearranged themselves into something coherent. Missing bank statements. Insurance notices arriving late. Bills Emily somehow already knew about before I mentioned them. Not random. Controlled. Michael studied my face carefully. "Daniel," he said quietly, "I need you to understand something." I looked up at him slowly. "This doesn't look impulsive." No. It didn't. That was the part making my hands shake. Impulsive betrayal still leaves room for guilt. This felt organized. Layered. Patient. Michael slid another document across the desk toward me. An intake packet from an assisted living facility 20 minutes outside Columbus. My name already typed across the top. Emergency contact. Emily Whitaker. Expected transition date. January 12th. I stared at the paper for a long moment while the office air conditioning hummed softly overhead. Then I noticed something near the bottom of the form. A checked box beside. Mild cognitive decline concerns. And underneath it. Family reports increasing confusion and memory instability. Family reports. Not doctors. Family. I looked down at my own hands resting against Michael's conference table. Hands that had built half the deck behind my house. Hands that still changed their own brake pads. Hands that had held my wife's fingers through chemotherapy treatments until the very end. And somewhere over the past few months, those same hands had quietly become evidence against me inside my own daughter's version of reality. Michael let the silence sit for a while after that. Not because he was trying to be dramatic. Because some information changes shape once you fully understand it. I kept staring at the assisted living intake packet lying on the conference table between us. Expected transition date. January 12th. 3 weeks away. 3 weeks until my daughter planned to relocate me out of my own house while realtors prepared to list the property behind my back. Michael finally spoke carefully. Do you know if Emily has access to your online banking? I nodded slowly. She helped me reset passwords after surgery. The moment I said it out loud, I hated myself a little. Not because I trusted my daughter. Because I suddenly realized trust can become a weapon if the wrong person decides to use it carefully enough. Michael wrote something down on a yellow legal pad. First thing today, we freeze everything. Everything. Bank accounts. Brokerage access. Property transfer authority. Medical release permissions. Hearing my own life reduced into categories of protection felt surreal. Like I'd somehow become an elderly client in someone else's case file overnight. Then Michael asked the question I'd been avoiding internally since yesterday. Do you think Emily is doing this alone? I looked out the office window toward the gray November traffic moving slowly through downtown Columbus. For several seconds, I honestly didn't know how to answer. Then I remembered the realtor's folder. The prepared listing. The forwarding address. The intake paperwork already completed. No, I said quietly. Michael nodded once. Neither do I. He opened another document on his laptop and turned the screen toward me. Phone records. Calls between Emily and Wexler Realty Group stretching back almost 2 months. 2 months. Before my surgery had even been scheduled. My stomach tightened. Because suddenly I understood something even worse than manipulation. Planning. This wasn't fear after my operation. This wasn't panic about my health. This had direction. Timeline. Coordination. Preparation. Michael slid another paper toward me. This came in through your email at 6:12 this morning. A digital document request. Property staging consultation. Requested by Emily Whitaker. I stared at it for several seconds without speaking. Then quietly asked the question I think part of me already knew the answer to. How do you prepare to sell someone's home before they've even left it? Michael looked at me carefully across the desk. The same way people slowly justify anything, he said. One practical decision at a time. That sentence stayed with me. Because I suddenly understood the terrifying part wasn't hatred. Emily probably believed she was helping. Simplifying. Managing. Preparing. People can do extraordinary damage once they convince themselves they're being reasonable. Michael closed the folder in front of him. Then his expression changed slightly. More serious. There's something else. My chest tightened immediately. What? The assisted living paperwork includes a physician recommendation. I frowned. My cardiologist never recommended assisted living. I know, Michael said quietly. He slid the final page across the desk toward me. Different doctor. Different clinic. Signature dated 4 days earlier. And beside the recommendation was a sentence that made my entire body go cold. Patient displays increasing confusion and diminished independent decision-making capacity. I stared at the signature for a long moment. Then finally whispered. I've never even met this doctor. I stared at the signature for so long the letters eventually started blurring together. Different doctor. Different clinic. Recommendation dated 4 days earlier. And I had never seen the man's face in my life. Michael took the document back carefully. Daniel, he said quietly, I need you to stay calm here. That's the sort of thing attorneys say right before telling you something that changes the structure of your reality. This physician works with elder care evaluations, he continued. Mostly assisted living placements and competency recommendations. I looked up slowly. How can he evaluate me if he's never met me? Michael didn't answer immediately. That silence told me enough. My chest tightened hard enough that for one terrible second I wondered if something had actually gone wrong with my heart after all. Then anger steadied it. Cold anger. The useful kind. Michael leaned forward slightly. The recommendation references family observations. Family observations. Interesting phrase. Because suddenly I could hear Emily's voice from the past 6 months differently. You already told me that story, Dad. Are you sure that bill got paid? You've seemed forgetful lately. At the time, I thought she was worried. Now every sentence felt like documentation being quietly built around me. Michael continued reviewing the paperwork. Then he stopped at one page near the back of the intake file. His expression changed immediately. What? I asked. He turned the page toward me. Inventory notes. Not medical. Property. Estimated furniture value. Antique pieces. Vehicle information. Suggested estate sale coordination. I stared at the page without speaking. Because suddenly the assisted living facility stopped looking like healthcare. It looked like transition management. Removal. Liquidation. Processing. Like I had already been converted into the administrative aftermath of my own life. Michael's office felt strangely quiet after that. Outside the window, downtown traffic moved through gray November light while people walked sidewalks carrying coffee cups and backpacks and grocery bags. Normal life. Meanwhile, mine was apparently being professionally dismantled by people using phrases like transition planning and cognitive concern assessments. Then Michael asked quietly. Daniel, when was the last time you personally reviewed your will? I frowned slightly. Maybe 2 years ago. Any recent updates? No. He nodded slowly. Then said. I think that needs to happen today. Something in his tone made my stomach tighten again. Why? Because if people are willing to build false medical documentation, he said carefully, I don't want to assume they stopped there. That sentence settled heavily into the room. Not because it sounded dramatic. Because it sounded reasonable. And reasonable fear is always worse. Michael stood and walked toward the office window with one hand in his pocket. Then quietly asked the question I think neither of us wanted to say out loud. Do you know who inherits the house if something happens to you before all this gets challenged? I already knew the answer. Emily. Everything. The house. The accounts. Karen's jewelry. The workshop. The investment portfolio I spent 30 years building. Emily. And for the first time since hearing voices through my front door the day before, I finally understood the real danger here. It wasn't just that they were planning my future without me. It was how financially convenient my absence had quietly become. And for the first time since this started, Michael looked genuinely alarmed. Michael spent the next 2 hours locking down every part of my life that still legally belonged to me. Bank accounts. Brokerage access. Property transfer permissions. Medical authorizations. I signed more paperwork that afternoon than I had during my actual surgery admission. By noon, my hands were shaking from exhaustion. Part of it was stress. Part of it was the realization that I now needed legal protection from my own daughter. Michael ordered sandwiches neither of us touched. Rain continued sliding down the office windows while gray November lights settled heavily across downtown Columbus. Then, a little after 2 p.m., his assistant knocked softly on the office door. "Daniel," she said carefully, "your daughter is here." My entire body went still. Michael looked at me immediately. "You didn't tell her you were coming here?" "No." That scared me more than if I had. Because it meant Emily had gone to my house, realized I never came home from the hospital, and started searching. Michael stood slowly. "You don't have to speak with her today." But I was already standing. Because part of me suddenly needed to see her face. Not the version from memory. The real one. Emily stood in the reception area still wearing the same dark green coat from the day before. The moment she saw me, relief flashed across her face so quickly it almost hurt to witness. "Dad." She moved toward me immediately. "You scared me to death." Interesting sentence. Because fear sounds very different once trust disappears. I studied her quietly for a moment. Same eyes Karen had. Same nervous habit of rubbing her thumb against her wedding ring when stressed. For one terrible second, I saw my little girl again instead of the woman carrying real estate paperwork through my backyard. Then she asked the question that erased the moment completely. "Why are you here with an attorney?" Not. "Are you okay?" Not. "Why didn't you come home?" An attorney. Michael stepped slightly beside me before answering. "Mr. Whitaker asked me to review several legal concerns." Emily's face changed almost instantly after that. Not dramatically. But enough. Like someone mentally recalculating a situation that was no longer unfolding the way they expected. She looked back at me carefully. "Dad. I think maybe somebody's confusing you." Confusing me. There it was again. That language. Soft. Reasonable. Controlled. The kind designed to make resistance sound like instability. I watched my daughter closely while she spoke. And suddenly I realized something painful. Emily genuinely believed she was the rational person in this situation. That was the frightening part. Not greed. Conviction. "Why didn't you tell me you were discharged early?" she asked gently. Gently. As if the previous afternoon hadn't happened. I looked at her for a long moment before answering. "Why didn't you tell me you were selling my house?" Silence. Real silence this time. The receptionist stopped typing. Even Michael's assistant froze near the hallway doorway. Emily blinked once. Then twice. And for the first time since this began, I finally saw it clearly on her face. Not guilt. Fear. Michael stepped forward before Emily could speak again. "Your father will not be signing anything without legal review moving forward," he said calmly. Emily's expression changed instantly after that. Not anger. Panic. Real panic. Because suddenly the timeline she had been managing so carefully no longer belonged entirely to her. She looked back at me quickly. "Dad, please, this is getting completely blown out of proportion." Interesting phrase. Because people usually say that right after the truth finally reaches the surface. Michael handed her his business card. "If anyone contacts Mr. Whitaker regarding property matters, medical placement, or financial authorization, they go through me now." Emily stared at the card without taking it. For the first time since I overheard voices through my front door, I finally saw uncertainty enter her face. Not uncertainty about whether she was right. Uncertainty about whether she was still in control. And standing there inside my attorney's office watching my daughter realize the situation had shifted beyond her management, I understood something painful. The real damage had already happened long before the paperwork. It happened the moment my daughter stopped seeing me as someone she needed to speak with. And started seeing me as a problem she needed to solve. Emily finally took the business card from Michael's hand. Not because she wanted it. Because refusing it would have acknowledged too much in front of everyone standing there. The reception area had gone completely quiet. Phones still rang somewhere deeper inside the office. Printers hummed. People walked past the front windows carrying umbrellas through the gray November rain. But inside that room, everything felt strangely still. Emily looked back at me carefully. "Dad, can we please talk alone?" Michael immediately started to answer for me. "That won't be." "It's all right," I interrupted quietly. He studied my face for a moment. Then nodded once. "There's a conference room down the hall." Emily followed me silently. The room smelled faintly like coffee and printer toner. Rainwater streaked slowly across the windows overlooking the parking garage next door. Neither of us sat down at first. For several seconds, my daughter simply stood there twisting her wedding ring around her finger the same way Karen used to when she was anxious. Then finally she said, "You really think I was trying to hurt you?" Interesting question. Because it avoided a much more important one. Not, "Did I do it?" but, "Did you think I meant harm?" I looked at her quietly. "There was already paperwork, Emily." She exhaled sharply. "You had surgery." "I had a valve procedure." "You're 65. That's not incapacitated." Her jaw tightened slightly after that. And for the first time since this started, some of the softness disappeared from her voice. "You weren't taking things seriously." There it was. Not greed. Not hatred. Control. I pulled out one of the conference room chairs slowly and sat down because my chest had started hurting again. Not emotionally. Physically. Emily noticed immediately. Her expression changed. Real concern this time. "Dad. I'm fine." "You don't look fine." Funny how quickly people rediscover your fragility once they realize you're no longer cooperating. She sat across from me finally. Then lowered her voice. "You scared me after the surgery." I said nothing. Because for the first time since overhearing her conversation at the house, I wanted to hear the version she told herself. Emily stared down at her hands. "When Mom died, you stopped letting people help you." That landed harder than I expected. Because part of it was true. She continued quietly. "You stopped traveling. You stopped seeing people. You spent all your time in that house fixing things that didn't need fixing. The porch railing. The gutters. The workshop shelves. Karen's old garden fence." I suddenly realized Emily had mistaken routine for decline. Silence settled between us for a few seconds. Then I asked the question that had been sitting in my chest since the beginning. "When were you going to tell me?" Emily looked away toward the rain-covered windows. "I didn't know how." No. That wasn't true. She knew how. She just knew I would say no. And both of us understood that at the exact same moment. I leaned back slowly in the chair. The realtor already had listing documents prepared. Emily rubbed both hands over her face. "I wasn't trying to steal your house." Then why was there an assisted living intake packet with my name already typed on it? She looked exhausted suddenly. "Not caught. Cornered by consequences. You were supposed to recover there temporarily," she said quietly. Just until things stabilized. While you sold my home? That wasn't finalized. But planned. She didn't answer. And silence answered better than words ever could. Rain rolled softly against the conference room windows while we sat across from each other in the kind of conversation families usually don't survive unchanged. Finally Emily spoke again. Very quietly this time. I really thought I was helping. I believed her. That was the worst part. Because somewhere between fear and practicality and grief and control, my daughter had slowly convinced herself that removing me from my own life was the responsible thing to do. And sitting there across from her in a lawyer's office while November rain darkened the windows behind us, I realized something painful. The house was never the real thing we were about to lose. We were. The legal proceedings lasted 3 months. Michael uncovered enough documentation to stop every transfer, revoke every authorization request, and formally challenge the assisted living recommendation tied to the fraudulent physician statement. The property listing never went live. The intake application was withdrawn. Emily eventually admitted she had let fear turn into management, and management turn into control. Not all at once. Slowly. The way people cross dangerous lines when they convince themselves the outcome matters more than the method. We still speak now. Carefully. Some conversations last 5 minutes. Some end badly. Some don't happen at all. Trust does not return to a relationship the same way money returns to a bank account. Some things rebuild slower. Some never fully do. I still live in the house. The porch swing still creaks. The gutters still overflow every November because I still haven't replaced them. Karen's garden fence still leans slightly to the left. And every now and then, I catch myself standing quietly in the kitchen realizing how close I came to becoming a visitor in my own life without even knowing it was happening. Thank you for listening. Calm justice doesn't shout. It keeps records.